She knelt in the dust before him, hands trembling, voice breaking as she whispered the words that would change everything. "If I leave now, I won't reach town alive." The Navajo scout stood silent as stone, his dark eyes measuring the truth in her plea, while somewhere in the desert behind them, the man who wanted her dead was already saddling his horse. The Arizona Territory stretched endless and unforgiving beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Heat rose in shimmering waves from the red earth, distorting the distant mesas until they seemed to float like ships on an invisible ocean. The air tasted of copper and sage, of ancient rock worn smooth by wind that had blown since before memory began. In this land, survival was earned daily, and mercy was a luxury few could afford. The desert did not forgive weakness, did not spare the foolish or the desperate, and it made no distinction between the guilty and the innocent. It simply waited, patient as death itself, for every living thing to make its final mistake. Mariana Ochoa stood at the kitchen window of the Thornton ranch house, hands submerged in wash water gone tepid and grey. Her fingers, wrinkled from hours of scrubbing, moved mechanically across the surface of a tin plate, while her eyes tracked the movement of men in the yard below. Cowboys adjusted saddles and checked cinches, their laughter carrying through the morning heat like the caw of distant crows. She had learned to read their moods by sound alone, the way a prisoner learns to interpret the footsteps of guards in the hallway outside their cell. Today, they were restless, eager, dangerous. Today, something had shifted in the air, some invisible current that made her skin prickle with warning. She had been working at the Thornton spread for 8 months now, hired on as house servant when the previous woman had fled in the night without explanation. Mariana had asked no questions then, though she understood now what she had been too desperate to see, that women did not leave good situations in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They fled bad ones. The work was hard but honest. Cooking, cleaning, mending, tending to the endless needs of a house full of men who tracked mud and blood across floors she had just scrubbed clean. She rose before dawn and fell into her narrow cot long after the rest of the household had retired, her body aching in ways she had never imagined possible. But it was work, and work meant survival, and survival was all she had left to cling to. The Thornton Ranch sat at the edge of Navajo territory, a sprawling collection of adobe buildings and weathered corrals that seemed to have grown from the red earth itself. It was owned by Clayton Thornton, a man whose wealth came from cattle, silver speculation, and business dealings that polite society chose not to examine too closely. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with pale eyes the color of winter ice that moved over everything he owned with the same proprietary calculation. Including her, Mariana had felt those eyes on her from the first day, measuring, assessing, waiting for the right moment to collect what he believed he was owed. She had learned to make herself invisible, to move through rooms like smoke, to keep her gaze lowered and her responses brief. For 8 months it had worked. For 8 months she had been safe, but safety, she had learned, was only ever temporary. The previous evening, Clayton Thornton's son had returned from the territorial capital with news that made his father's face darken like a summer storm gathering on the horizon. James Thornton was a younger version of his father, but without the restraint that age and experience had taught the older man. Where Clayton was calculating, James was impulsive. Where Clayton was cruel with purpose, James was cruel for pleasure. Mariana had seen the way he looked at the ranch hands, the way he spoke to the Mexican workers who tended the horses, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought no one was watching. She had known men like him before, men who believed the world existed for their amusement, and that anything weaker than themselves was fair game. Now, as she scrubbed plates in water that had long since lost its warmth, she tried to ignore the knot of dread that had been tightening in her stomach. Since the moment James had ridden through the gate, she had survived this long by staying small, staying quiet, staying beneath notice. Whatever storm was brewing in the Thornton household, she told herself, it had nothing to do with her. She was wrong. Mariana. The voice cut through her thoughts like a blade, sharp and sudden. She turned to find Margaret Thornton standing in the kitchen doorway, her face pinched with the particular sourness of a woman who had married for money and spent every day since regretting it. She was thin and pale, her beauty long since dried up by the harsh sun and harsher marriage. Her fingers worried constantly at the cameo brooch pinned to her high collar, as though she could draw comfort from its smooth surface. Once, Mariana imagined, Margaret Thornton had been young and hopeful, full of dreams about what her life would become. Now she was a ghost, haunting her own house, waiting for death to release her from a prison she had walked into willingly. "Yes, ma'am," Mariana said quietly, drying her hands on her apron. She kept her voice neutral, her expression carefully blank. "Mr. Thornton wants coffee brought to his office, and make it strong. He's in a mood." Margaret's eyes darted toward the hallway, where raised voices could be heard behind a closed door. The words were muffled, but the anger in them was unmistakable. His son brought bad news from Santa Fe, something about land deeds and survey disputes with the Navajo reservation. The government's getting involved, sending inspectors to verify property boundaries. Clayton doesn't like government men poking into his affairs. Too many questions get asked when officials start looking at how he acquired certain parcels of land. Mariana nodded, already moving to the stove where the coffee pot sat perpetually warming. She poured the thick black liquid into a china, a cup, the good set reserved for Clayton's exclusive use, and arranged it on a silver tray with the sugar bowl and a small pitcher of cream he never used, but insisted be present anyway. Everything in the Thornton household was about appearances, about maintaining the illusion of civilization in a place where civilization was as thin as morning frost. "Be quick about it," Margaret added, her voice dropping to something almost like concern. "And don't linger. When he's in this state, it's best to be elsewhere. Make yourself scarce for the rest of the day if you can manage it." The warning was clear, and Mariana felt a chill run down her spine despite the heat. She had seen Clayton. Thornton's temper before had watched him strike a ranch hand across the face with his riding crop for perceived disrespect, had heard the way he spoke to his wife behind closed doors when he thought no servants were listening. The walls of the house were thick adobe, but sound carried in the night, and Mariana's small room off the kitchen was close enough to hear things she wished she could forget. She had learned that powerful men were most dangerous when their power was threatened, and right now Clayton Thornton felt threatened. She carried the tray down the dim hallway, her footsteps silent on the woven Navajo rugs that covered the floors. Beautiful rugs, intricate patterns in red and black and cream, rugs that had likely been acquired through methods she preferred not to consider. Everything in this house had been taken from someone. Everything carried the weight of theft disguised as commerce. She knocked twice on the office door, soft and deferential, and the voices inside ceased abruptly. "Enter," Clayton's voice barked, rough with barely contained fury. Mariana pushed open the door with her shoulder, keeping her eyes lowered as she had been trained to do. The office was all dark wood and leather, the walls lined with books. Clayton had never read, and trophies from animals he had paid other men to hunt. A massive grizzly bear skin sprawled across one wall, its mouth frozen in an eternal snarl. Behind the massive oak desk sat Clayton himself, his face flushed with anger, a vein throbbing visibly at his temple. Across from him stood his son James, a younger version of his father, but with harder eyes, and a mouth that curved naturally toward cruelty. He was leaning against the bookshelf with studied casualness, but there was tension in his shoulders, excitement barely contained. "Your coffee, sir," Mariana murmured, setting the tray on the desk with careful precision. She kept her movements, small, unobtrusive, praying they would dismiss her quickly so she could escape back to the relative safety of the kitchen. "About damn time," Clayton muttered, waving her away with one meaty hand. But as she turned to leave, James spoke, and his voice stopped her like a hand wrapped around her throat. Wait." The word hung in the air, heavy with menace. "Father, isn't this the woman you were telling me about? The one who came from the Martinez household in Tucson?" Mariana's blood turned to ice. The room seemed to tilt, the walls pressing in. She had never mentioned the Martinez family, had never spoken of her time in Tucson, of the elegant house where she had worked, of the terrible things she had witnessed there. She had buried that. Life had recreated herself as someone new, someone with no past and no connections. She had forged a letter of reference, had given Margaret Thornton a story about being widowed young and needing work, had been so careful, so impossibly careful. Clayton looked at her with new interest, his pale eyes narrowing like a cat that has just noticed a mouse. "That's right, I'd forgotten. You worked for the Martinez family before coming here, didn't you? Wealthy Spanish family, old money, connections all the way to Mexico City." "Yes, sir, for a time." Her voice remained steady through sheer force of will, but her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain they could hear it. Inside her chest, panic clawed and scratched, desperate to escape. James smiled, and it was not a kind expression. It was the smile of a man who has just won a game no one else knew they were playing. "Interesting, because I happened to mention to some associates in Santa Fe that we had a former Martinez servant working here. Purely in passing, you understand. Small talk over drinks, and do you know what I learned?" He pushed off from the bookshelf, moving closer, circling her like a predator. "The Martinez family reported a theft 8 months ago. A significant amount of silver and cash, taken the same night their house servant disappeared without notice. Just vanished along with several pieces of valuable jewelry and a considerable sum from the household safe." The room tilted. Mariana's fingers tightened on her apron, bunching the fabric, the only outward sign of the terror flooding through her veins like poison. It was a lie. She had taken nothing, but she had witnessed something far more valuable and far more dangerous than stolen silver. She had seen Señor Martinez strike his young wife during an argument, had watched the woman fall and strike her, head against the marble fireplace, had seen the spreading pool of blood. She had heard him tell his men to dispose of the body and say she had run off with a lover, creating a scandal that would explain her disappearance. Mariana had fled that night, knowing that a witness to murder was worth less than nothing, that her life could be snuffed out as easily as a candle flame. "I took nothing," she said, and even to her own ears the words sounded hollow, desperate. "I left because I had to, because staying would have been dangerous." Dangerous. James laughed, a sharp bark of amusement. "That's what they all say when they're caught. Always an excuse, always a reason. But the Martinez family has filed a formal complaint with the territorial marshal. They're offering a substantial reward for information leading to the recovery of their property and the apprehension of the thief. $500. That's more than most men make in 2 years out here. And here you are, conveniently working, under your mother's maiden name, hiding in plain sight." "Ochoa is my mother's name," Mariana said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking, fighting to maintain some shred of dignity. "I used it because I wanted to start fresh after my husband died. That's not a crime. Using your mother's name isn't the same as hiding." "And this maybe not," Clayton said slowly, leaning back in his chair with the deliberate movements of a man considering all angles. "But theft is. And if the law comes looking for you, well, I can't harbor a known criminal under my roof. Bad for business. Bad for my reputation. especially now with all these government inspectors crawling around, looking for any excuse to seize property or impose fines. I need to be seen as a pillar of the community, a man who cooperates fully with the authorities. You understand, I'm sure. The trap closed around her with perfect, terrible clarity. They were going to turn her in. Not because they believed she was guilty, not because they cared about justice, but because it was convenient. Because having a wanted woman discovered on his property would give Clayton leverage with the authorities, a gesture of cooperation and civic responsibility that might soften whatever investigation was coming his way. She was going to be sacrificed on the altar of his ambition, her life traded for political favor. Please, Mariana heard herself say, and she hated the desperation in her voice, hated the way it made her sound small and broken. I didn't take anything. I can explain everything if you just give me time to— Time? James interrupted, moving even closer now, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the pomade in his hair. The marshal's already on his way. Father sent word this morning by express rider. Marshal Garrett should be here by tomorrow evening. You'll have plenty of time to explain everything to him, and then he'll take you back to Tucson in chains, and you'll face whatever justice the Martinez family deems appropriate. I'm sure they'll be very understanding. Down. The words hit her like physical blows, each one landing with crushing weight. Tomorrow evening. Less than 2 days before she would be dragged back to Tucson, back to the Martinez family, who would silence her permanently rather than risk what she knew. They would call it justice, call it punishment for theft, and no one would question the word of a wealthy Spanish family over a Mexican servant. She would disappear, and the world would forget she had ever existed. "Get out," Clayton said, already dismissing her, already moving on to more important matters. His hand waved toward the door with casual cruelty. "And don't think about running. I've got men watching every road out of here. You try to leave, and I'll have you shot as an escaping criminal. Hell, I might even collect that reward myself. Now get out of my sight." Mariana nodded once, not trusting her voice, and fled the office. Her legs carried her back to the kitchen on instinct alone, her vision blurred, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. She made it to the wooden stool by the wash basin before her legs gave out entirely, and she collapsed onto it with her head in her hands. 8 months, 8 months of careful invisibility, of building a new life, of believing she might actually survive, and it had shattered in an instant, destroyed by careless conversation and political convenience. Through the window, she could see the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and blood. The light caught the edges of the distant mesas, turning them to golden shadow. Somewhere out there, beyond the ranch boundaries, beyond the fences and the guards, lay Navajo land, forbidden territory where few white men dared venture without. An army at their backs, where the red earth hid canyons deep enough to swallow a person whole, where warriors who knew every stone and shadow could appear and disappear like ghosts. A desperate plan began to form in her mind, fragile and terrible. As spiderweb silk, if she could reach Navajo territory, she might have a chance. The Thorntons wouldn't follow her there, not without significant force. But the reservation boundary was 15 miles across open desert, with no water, no shelter, no landmarks she could recognize. She would be walking blind into country that killed experienced travelers. The desert would not care about her innocence or her desperation. It would simply take her, the way it took everything eventually. It was suicide. But staying was certain. A death, just slower, more cruel. The kitchen door opened and Margaret Thornton entered, moving with the quiet hesitation of someone approaching a wounded animal. For a moment, the two women looked at each other across the fading light, and Mariana saw something unexpected in the older woman's eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The recognition of one trapped creature seeing another. Margaret Thornton. knew what it meant to be property, to have her choices stripped away, to live at the mercy of men who viewed her as nothing more than a possession. "You should have run the moment James arrived," Margaret said quietly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure they were alone. "He's crueler than his father ever was. Clayton is brutal when it serves his interests, but James enjoys other people's suffering. I've watched him torture animals since he was a boy, pulling wings off flies, drowning cats in the horse trough. People are just bigger animals to him, more interesting because they can beg." "There's nowhere to run," Mariana replied, her voice hollow as wind through an empty house. "Your husband has men watching the roads. I wouldn't make it 5 miles. Margaret moved to the window, looking out at the desert that stretched beyond sight, infinite and merciless. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft Mariana almost missed it. "The Navajo scout, Todachin, he comes once a week to trade information about Apache movements in exchange for supplies. Clayton pays him to keep track of raids, to warn us if war parties are moving through the territory. He's due tomorrow morning before dawn. He always comes early before anyone else is awake because he doesn't like being seen by the ranch hands. They make him uncomfortable, all those white men staring. He knows the desert better than any man alive, white or Indian. If anyone could get you across safely, it would be him." Just Mariana's heart stuttered, hope flaring painfully in her chest like a match struck in darkness. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret turned, and her eyes were hard as flint, glittering with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. "Because I've been a prisoner in this house for 20 years. Because I've watched Clayton destroy everyone he touches, watched him grind people down until there's nothing left but dust. Because you're young enough to still have a life ahead of you, and I'm not so dead inside that I can't remember what that feels like. I had dreams once, I wanted things. And then I married a man who saw me as property, and every dream died." She paused, her fingers returning to worry at her cameo, that endless nervous habit. "But understand this clearly. If you go, you're on your own. I can't help you beyond this moment. I won't risk what little I have left. Clayton would kill me if he knew I told you this, and he would make it look like an accident. I've thought about leaving myself 100 times. I never had the courage. Maybe you will." "I understand," Mariana whispered, her throat tight. "Todachin arrives at dawn. He meets Clayton in the barn to receive his supplies before anyone else is awake. If you're going to approach him, that's your only chance. After that, the ranch will be crawling with men, and your window closes forever." Margaret moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. "I don't know if he'll help you. The Navajo have no love for white men or their servants. We've taken everything from them, pushed them onto the worst land, killed their families, broken every treaty we ever made. But Todachin is different somehow. There's something in his eyes, some kind of honor that Clayton hasn't been able to corrupt, though God knows he's tried. He's your only hope." Then she was gone, leaving Mariana alone in the fading light, alone with a choice that was no choice at all. That night Mariana did not sleep. She lay on her narrow cot in the small room off the kitchen, listening to the house settle around her like a living thing. She heard Clayton's heavy footsteps retiring to his bedroom, heard James laughing with some of the ranch hands over whiskey and cards, their voices carrying through the walls. She heard Margaret moving somewhere above, pacing endlessly back and forth in her room like a caged animal. She heard the wind picking up outside, carrying the scent of coming rain and the distant howl of coyotes. Somewhere out in the darkness, a horse whinnied, and she wondered if it could sense the storm that was coming, the change in the air. She had made her decision. At dawn, she would approach the Navajo scout. She would throw herself on his mercy and pray that somewhere in his heart there existed compassion for a desperate woman. It was a gamble with her life as the stakes, a roll of dice with death waiting on every side. But staying was no gamble at all. It was simply a slower way to die, a more painful surrender. As the first grey light began to leak through her window, turning the world from black to charcoal, Mariana rose. She dressed in her plainest clothes, dark and practical, clothes meant for work rather than display. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and splashed cold water on her face from the basin. She owned almost nothing. A spare dress, a worn shawl, a small wooden cross her mother had given her before consumption took her 10 years ago. She left it all behind. If this worked, she would need to move fast and light. If it didn't, possessions wouldn't matter anyway. The ranch was silent as she slipped through the kitchen door, moving like a shadow through shadows. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, streaks of pink and gold stretching across the horizon like fingers reaching for something just out of grasp. The air was cool, almost cold, the last breath of night before the hammer of day fell. Her footsteps whispered across the packed earth as she made her way toward the barn, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. And there, emerging from the purple shadows, like a figure from a dream or a nightmare, she saw him. Todachin was not what she had expected. The Navajo scout was tall and lean, built like a man who had spent his entire life walking, moving with the easy grace of someone completely at home in his body. His hair hung long and dark, tied back with a strip of red cloth. He wore a mix of traditional and white man's clothing, deerskin leggings decorated with beadwork, a plain cotton shirt, a leather vest adorned with silver conchos that caught the early light. His face was angular and weathered by wind and sun, impossible to read, his eyes dark as obsidian and just as sharp. There was something about him that reminded her of the desert itself, beautiful and dangerous and utterly indifferent to human. Once he saw her approach and went still, one hand dropping instinctively to the knife at his belt. For a long moment they stared at each other across the space between them, two people from different worlds, meeting in the pale dawn. She could see him assessing her, measuring threat and intent, deciding in an instant whether she was worth his attention or his blade. Then, before courage could fail her, before reason could intervene and tell her this was madness, Mariana dropped to her knees in the dust before him. The earth was cold and hard beneath her, and she felt small, powerless, exposed, but she had nothing left to lose, nothing left to protect, and sometimes surrender was the only form of strength available. "Please," she whispered, and the word broke on her lips like glass shattering. "If I leave now, I won't reach town alive." Todachin stood motionless as carved stone, his dark eyes fixed on the kneeling woman before him. The morning light caught the silver conchos on his vest, making them gleam like small moons against the leather. For what felt like an eternity he said nothing, did nothing, merely studied her with an intensity that made Mariana's skin prickle. She kept her head bowed, her hands pressed flat against her thighs, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run, even as her mind knew there was nowhere left to go. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, shaped by a language that predated the white man's presence in this land by countless generations. "You kneel in the dirt before a man you do not know. That speaks of great fear or great foolishness, perhaps both." His English was precise, almost formal, learned from missionaries or traders who had long since moved on or died. "Stand up. I do not accept prayers from white women." Mariana rose slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. Now that she was upright, she could see him more clearly in the growing light. He was perhaps 30 years old, though it was difficult to tell. The desert aged people in strange ways, weathering them like stone until time became meaningless. There was a scar along his left jaw, pale against his copper skin, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who lived by his wits and his weapons. But it was his eyes that held her, deep and unreadable as canyon shadows. "I am not white," she said quietly, finding her voice somewhere beneath the fear. "My mother was Yaqui, from Sonora. My father was Spanish. I am neither one thing nor the other. Just as you walk between your people and the white men who pay you." Something flickered in his expression, too quick to name. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, or anger at her presumption. "You know nothing of what I am or why I walk where I do, and you insult me by comparing your choices to mine. I was not given choices. My choices were taken." "Then we have that in common," Mariana replied, and some desperate courage she did not know she possessed kept her voice steady. "Because mine have been taken too. And now I have only one left, to beg for help or to die. I choose to beg." Todachin tilted his head slightly, studying her with the same careful attention he might give to tracks in the sand. "The man who owns this ranch, Thornton. He knows you are here speaking to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." No, if he knew, I would already be dead, or locked away until the marshal comes tomorrow to take me back to people who will kill me and call it justice. "What did you do?" "I witnessed a murder, a rich man killing his wife. I ran before he could silence me. Now he has accused me of theft, and the authorities believe him because he has money and I have nothing. They will hang me or worse, and the truth will die with me." Todachin was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting past her toward the ranch house where smoke was beginning to rise from the kitchen chimney. Other servants would be waking soon, starting their day, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the shadowed space between the barn and the breaking dawn. "This is not my problem. Your people and their lies and their murders. You make messes and expect others to clean them." "I am not asking you to clean anything," Mariana said, and now desperation bled through into her words, raw and undeniable. "I am asking you to guide me across the desert to Navajo land, just to the boundary. After that I will disappear. You will never see me again. I will be one more ghost in a land full of them. The desert will kill you within a day. You have no water, no food, no knowledge of the land. You are city-raised, soft-handed. You would not last past noon. Then I will die in the desert instead of at the end of a rope. At least the desert does not lie about what it is. At least it kills honestly." He studied her for another long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A foolish woman, a desperate one, someone worth saving or someone already dead. Then he turned away, moving toward his horse, a sturdy paint gelding that stood ground-tied near the barn entrance. She thought he was leaving, thought her gamble had failed, thought this was the end. But then he paused and spoke without looking back. "Clayton Thornton will come soon. He expects his supplies and his information. When he finds you here, he will assume you tried to steal from the barn or run away. He will make an example of you. Do you understand? He will beat you, possibly kill you, certainly lock you away until the marshal arrives. You need to be gone from this place within the next 10 minutes. Hope flared in Mariana's chest, painful and bright. "You will help me." "I did not say that. I said you need to be gone. What happens after that is between you and the desert and whatever gods you pray to." He began checking his saddle, tightening straps with efficient movements. "But if a woman were to follow me at a distance, were to keep quiet and move fast, were to ask no questions and expect no comfort, then perhaps that woman might find herself closer to the boundary than she was before. This is not help. This is simply me riding the path I was already going to ride." It was the closest thing to yes she was going to receive, and she understood that accepting it meant accepting everything that came with it. No promises, no protection beyond what circumstance might provide, no guarantee she would survive the day. But it was more than she had 5 minutes ago. It was a thread of possibility in a world that had offered her nothing but nooses. "I understand," she said. "Thank you." "Do not thank me. You may curse me before this day ends." The desert shows no mercy to fools, and I am a fool for allowing this." He swung onto his horse with the fluid grace of someone who had been riding since childhood. "Stay far behind. If anyone sees you following me, I will deny all knowledge. If you cannot keep pace, I will not wait. If you die, I will not bury you. These are the terms. I accept them." He looked down at her from his height on the horse, and for just a moment, something almost like respect crossed his features. "You have more courage than sense. That will either save you or kill you. We will know which before the sun sets." Then he turned the horse and began riding south, away from the ranch, toward the open desert that stretched beyond sight. Mariana watched him go, counting to 30 in her head to create distance between them, and then she began to walk. She had no horse, no supplies, nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination forged from desperation. Behind her, the ranch was beginning to stir. She could hear voices calling to one another, the clang of pots from the kitchen, the lowing of cattle being moved from night pastures. Any moment now, someone would notice she was not at her post. Any moment now, the alarm would be raised. She walked faster, her eyes fixed on the distant figure of Todachin as he moved steadily south. The land here was relatively flat, covered in scrub brush and scattered rocks, offering little cover but at least allowing her to see where she was going. The sun was rising now, a fierce white disk climbing into a sky already bleached of color by the intensity of its light. Heat began to build, subtle at first, but growing with each passing minute. Mariana felt sweat beginning to gather at her. Temples felt her throat already growing dry. Behind her a shout rose from the ranch, then another. She did not turn to look, did not slow her pace. They had discovered her absence. They would be organizing now, deciding whether to pursue immediately or wait for Clayton to give orders. She had perhaps a 10-minute head start, maybe less. Everything depended on how quickly they could saddle horses and which direction they chose to search first. Todachin had not looked back once. He rode as though completely alone, as though no desperate woman followed in his wake. But she noticed that his pace was slightly slower than it needed to be, just slow enough that she could keep him in sight. It was not kindness, she told herself. It was simply practicality. A woman who fell too far behind would be caught, and her capture might implicate him. He was protecting himself, not her. The ground began to change, becoming rockier, more uneven. Mariana's feet, accustomed to wooden floors and packed earth yards, protested with each step. Her shoes, thin-soled things meant for indoor work, offered little protection against the sharp stones and thorny plants that seemed to reach for her with every stride. But she did not slow down, could not slow down. Pain was temporary, death was permanent. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, Todachin stopped. He dismounted in the shadow of a large boulder and waited for her to approach. When she reached him, gasping for breath, her face flushed with heat and exertion, he handed her a water skin without comment. She drank gratefully, forcing herself to take small sips rather than gulping as her body demanded. "They will pursue," he said, scanning the horizon behind them. "Thornton cannot afford to let you escape. It would make him look weak, and weak men do not survive long in this territory. He will come with men and guns and dogs if he has them." "How far to the boundary?" Mariana asked between breaths. 15 miles as the crow flies. 20 on foot across this terrain. We have covered perhaps 2. You are already struggling, and the heat has barely begun." He studied her critically, taking in her inadequate clothing, her soft hands, her city-raised weakness. "You will not make it walking. Not in time." Mariana's heart sank. She had known this was likely, had known her body was not built for this kind of endurance, but hearing it confirmed made the reality hit harder. "Then what do I do?" Todachin was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as though chewing on words he did not want to speak. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he said, "You ride with me. It is the only way. But understand this clearly. My people see me riding with a white woman, even a half-white woman. There will be questions, suspicions. I am already viewed with distrust by many for working with Thornton. This will make it worse." "I would not ask if there was any other choice," Mariana said quietly. "I know what I am asking you to sacrifice. You know nothing of what you ask. But it is too late now. You have already drawn me into this, whether I wished it or not. Come, mount behind me. Hold tight, but do not speak unless I tell you to, and pray that your pursuers are slower than I think they will be." He pulled her up behind him with surprising strength, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the hard muscle beneath his shirt, the steady rhythm of his breathing. The horse shifted under the added weight, but did not protest, well-trained and strong. Todachin kicked the animal into a faster pace, not quite a gallop, but faster than the careful walk he had maintained before. They rode in silence for what might have been an hour, the landscape changing gradually around them. The flat scrubland gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinon pine. Arroyos cut across their path, dry watercourses that would run with flash floods during the monsoon season, but now held only sand and stone. The sun climbed higher, becoming a physical weight pressing down from above. Mariana's arms ached from holding on, her legs cramped from the unfamiliar position, but she did not complain. Discomfort was a small price for continued life. Todachin suddenly tensed, his head turning slightly to listen. Mariana heard it too, carried on the hot wind, the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders coming fast. He cursed in his own language, a sharp guttural sound, and pushed the horse harder. They descended into a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side, providing some cover, but also limiting their options if they were cornered. "How many?" Mariana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At least 4, maybe more. They have split up to cover more ground, but this group has our trail. Thornton is not a skilled tracker, but he has hired men who are." He guided the horse around a bend in the canyon, his eyes constantly moving, searching for options. "There is a place ahead, a split in the canyon. If we can reach it before they see which path we take, we might lose them." They rode harder, the horse's breathing becoming labored, foam beginning to show at its mouth. Mariana could hear the pursuit getting closer, could hear men's voices calling to one another as they coordinated their search. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat like a drum counting down to capture or death. The canyon split ahead, just as Todachin had said. One path continued straight, wide and obvious. The other branched left, narrower and partially hidden by a rockfall. Todachin chose the left path without hesitation, guiding the horse carefully over loose stones, moving as quietly as possible. Once around the corner, he dismounted quickly and pulled Mariana down with him. He led the horse deeper into the narrow space, into shadows so deep they seemed almost cool. "Silence," he breathed, barely audible. Complete silence. They pressed against the canyon wall, the horse between them and the entrance to their hiding place. Mariana held her breath, her entire body rigid with fear. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls, making it impossible to judge distance or direction. Then voices clear and close. "Trail goes straight," one man called out. She recognized the voice. Tom Beckett, one of the ranch hands, a man with a cruel streak and a talent for tracking. "No sign of them turning off." "Check anyway," another voice responded. James Thornton. Of course he would come personally. He would not miss the chance to be present when she was captured. "My father wants her found before noon. Every minute she's loose is an embarrassment to this family." Footsteps approached their hiding place. Mariana could see a shadow falling across the narrow entrance, could see the outline of a man on horseback peering into the darkness. Her lungs burned from holding her breath. Beside her, Todachin had drawn his knife, a long blade that caught what little light penetrated their shelter. His face was calm, but his body was coiled, ready to strike if necessary. "Nothing here but rocks and shadow," Beckett finally said. "They must have kept going straight." We're wasting time. Fine, ride hard. If they reach the boundary before we catch them, we'll have an incident with the Navajo, and that's the last thing my father needs right now." James's voice was tight with frustration. "Find her, kill the Indian if you have to, but bring her back." The hoofbeats resumed, moving away down the main canyon, fading gradually until silence returned. Mariana released her breath in a shaking gasp, her legs suddenly weak. Todachin sheathed his knife and moved to check the horse, running his hands along its legs and flanks, ensuring it had not been injured by the hard ride. "That was too close," Mariana whispered. "It will happen again. They are determined, and we still have many miles to cover. But we have bought ourselves time. They will ride far down the main canyon before realizing their mistake. By then we will have taken a different path entirely." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "You understand now what you have drawn me into? If they had found us, they would have killed me without question. A Navajo scout helping a fugitive white woman escape. I would have been shot and left for the crows. My death would have been written off as justified, another savage who betrayed his employers." "I am sorry," Mariana said, and meant it. "I did not want to bring danger to you, but I had no other choice. We all have choices. The question is which ones we can live with afterward." He mounted the horse again and pulled her up behind him. "We ride a different way now. Harder terrain, more difficult for them to follow, but also more difficult for us. Hold on!" They rode out of the canyon through a series of switchbacks that climbed steeply up the canyon wall. The horse struggled with the grade, its hooves slipping on loose scree, but Todachin guided it with expert hands, choosing each step carefully. At the top, they emerged onto a high mesa that stretched away toward the south, covered in sparse grass and scattered boulders. The view was spectacular, the land falling away on all sides, revealing the vast scale of the desert and the insignificance of human drama played out against it. "Rest here briefly," Todachin said, dismounting. "The horse needs to catch its breath, and we need to see if they have realized their mistake." Mariana slid down from the horse, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. Every muscle in her body ached. Her skin felt burned even through her clothes, and her throat was parched despite the water she had drunk earlier. But she was alive, and she was further from the Thornton Ranch than she had been an hour ago. That had to count for something. From their vantage point, they could see for miles. The canyon they had just left was visible below, a dark slash in the red earth. And there in the distance, moving back toward the split in the canyon, were 4 riders. They had realized their mistake. They were backtracking. "They know," Mariana said, her voice tight. "They know we are not ahead of them. But they do not yet know where we are. By the time they search the side canyon and pick up our trail again, we will have more distance. But they will not give up. Men like Thornton do not give up. They view stubbornness as a virtue." He offered her the water skin again. "Drink, but not too much. We have a long way to go, and water is life in the desert." She drank sparingly, the water warm but precious. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could have left me behind in that canyon. Could have said I forced you at knife point. Could have preserved your reputation with Thornton. Why risk everything for someone you do not know?" Todachin looked out across the vast landscape, his expression distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "My sister, she was taken by white men when I was young, soldiers who came through our lands. They took her from our hogan while my mother screamed and my father fought until they beat him unconscious. We never saw her again. I do not know if she lived or died, if she was sold or kept, if she remembered us or forgot. For years I searched, asked questions, followed rumors, found nothing." He turned to look at Mariana, and she saw in his eyes a grief that had hardened into something else, something colder and more enduring. "So when I see a woman running from men who mean her harm, I think of my sister. I think that perhaps somewhere someone helped her. Or perhaps no one did, and she died alone and afraid. I cannot change the past, but I can choose what I do now." Mariana felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. Tears were a luxury, salt and water the body could not afford to waste. I am sorry for what happened to your sister, and I am grateful for what you are doing for me. Gratitude is premature. We are not safe yet. We will not be safe until you are across the boundary, and I am far away from you. Then perhaps we both survive this foolishness. He mounted the horse once more. Come, we must move. They rode across the mesa as the sun climbed toward its zenith, turning the world into a furnace of light and heat. Behind them, pursuit continued, sometimes visible in the distance, sometimes hidden by terrain. It became a deadly game of distance and endurance. Predator and prey across a landscape that cared nothing for either. The sun had reached its brutal zenith when Todachin finally stopped at the edge of a dry wash, the horse trembling with exhaustion beneath them. They had been riding for hours, pushing hard across terrain that seemed designed to break both animal and human spirit. The landscape had transformed around them, becoming increasingly harsh and alien. Gone were the rolling hills and scattered vegetation of the ranchlands. Here the earth was broken and tortured, carved by ancient floods into a maze of arroyos and stone pillars that rose like the bones of dead giants. Mariana slid from the horse and immediately collapsed to her knees, her legs refusing to support her weight any longer. Every inch of her body screamed in protest. Her hands were blistered from gripping the saddle, her thighs raw from the constant friction of riding, her face burned despite her darker complexion. The heat was unlike anything she had experienced, a physical presence that pressed down from above and radiated up from the baked earth below, trapping her between two sources of merciless fire. Todachin dismounted with more grace, but she could see the weariness in his movements, the slight stiffness that spoke of hours in the saddle. He led the horse into the meager shade provided by an overhanging rock face and began checking its hooves one by one, removing stones and debris with practiced efficiency. The animal's head hung low, its flanks heaving, foam white against its dark coat. "We cannot push it much further without rest," he said, not looking at her. "A dead horse in the desert means dead riders. We stop here for 2 hours. Let the worst heat pass. Let the animal recover." He pulled a worn blanket from his saddlebags and spread it in the shade, then gestured for her to sit. "Rest while you can. When we move again, it will be hard riding until sunset." Mariana crawled into the shade and collapsed onto the blanket, every movement an agony. She had never imagined the human body could hurt in so many ways, simultaneously. "How far have we come?" she managed to ask, her voice cracked and dry despite the water she had drunk. "Perhaps 8 miles. Maybe 9. He sat down against the rock wall, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon behind them. "Not as far as I hoped. The horse is strong, but it carries double weight. We are slower than I calculated." "And how far to the boundary?" "About 10 miles. Perhaps 12, depending on which path we take. There is a closer route, but it crosses exposed ground, where we would be visible for miles. The safer route is longer, but provides more cover. I have not yet decided which risk is greater." Mariana closed her eyes, trying to calculate. 10 to 12 more miles. At their current pace, with rest stops, that meant at least 4 more hours of riding. Could she endure 4 more hours of this torture? Did she have a choice? Behind them, somewhere in the shimmering heat, James Thornton and his men were still searching. Every minute she spent here was a minute they gained. "They will find our trail eventually," Todachin said, as if reading her thoughts. "The mesa top is hard ground, but not impossible to track across. They will see the direction we traveled and adjust their search. But they must also rest their horses, must also deal with the heat. We have an advantage in that I know this land and they do not. I know where water can be found, where shelter exists, which paths are passable and which are death traps. They will make mistakes. The question is whether those mistakes will be enough." He pulled dried meat from his saddlebag and offered her a piece. It was tough and salty, but she chewed it gratefully, her body desperate for any sustenance. They ate in silence, the only sounds the labored breathing of the horse and the occasional whisper of wind across stone. The shade was a blessing, but the heat was still oppressive, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. After a while, Mariana spoke. "Tell me about your people, about the land we are traveling toward. I know nothing except what white men say, and I suspect most of that is lies." Todachin was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then slowly he began to speak. "My people are Diné, what the Spanish called Navajo, a name that is not ours but which has been forced upon us like so many other things. We have lived in this land since the beginning of time, since first man and first woman emerged from the worlds below and taught us how to live in balance with all things. We are shepherds and weavers, farmers and hunters. We built hogans that faced the rising sun and sang songs that kept the world in harmony." He paused, his jaw tightening. Then the white men came. First the Spanish, then the Mexicans, then the Americans. Each one promised peace and brought only war. They wanted our land, our water, our lives. They stole our children and sent them to schools where they were beaten for speaking our language. They killed our sheep and burned our fields. They forced us to walk hundreds of miles to a prison camp they called Bosque Redondo, where thousands died of disease and starvation. My grandmother survived that walk. She told me stories that gave me nightmares for years. Mariana listened, shame burning in her chest. She had known that the Navajo had suffered, had heard vague references to conflicts and relocations, but the comfortable people she had served had never spoken of such things in detail. It was easier to see indigenous peoples as obstacles to progress, rather than as human beings whose entire world had been systematically destroyed. "When they finally let us return," Todachin continued, "they gave us a fraction of our original lands, the worst lands, the driest, most barren country, and they told us to be grateful. They put boundaries on paper and said we could not cross them without permission. They made us dependent on their government rations, their Indian agents who were mostly corrupt men who sold the supplies meant for us and kept the money. We went from being a free people to being prisoners in our own homeland. Yet you work for Thornton," Mariana said carefully. "You help him take his supplies. Why?" His eyes flashed with something dangerous. "You think I have a choice? My family needs food. The government rations are not enough to survive on. I have skills the white men value. I can track, I can read the land, I know where the Apache war parties move. So I sell this knowledge to men like Thornton, and I take their supplies. And I swallow my pride, because pride does not fill empty bellies. But do not mistake necessity for loyalty. I despise him and everything he represents. Every time I take his supplies, I think about how many of my people his kind have killed. Every time I give him information, I choose carefully what I tell and what I do not. It is a dance, a dangerous game. One wrong step and I could end up like my father. What happened to your father?" He refused to dance. He refused to bow. He spoke out against the Indian agent who was stealing from us, who was selling our rations and starving our children. One night the agent sent men. They said my father attacked them, that he was drunk and violent. They shot him and left his body in the desert for the crows. I was 15 years old. I found him 3 days later. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, but Mariana could see the old rage burning beneath the calm surface. That is when I learned the truth does not matter when you have no power. Only survival matters. Only being smart enough, careful enough, quiet enough to live another day. Mariana felt tears threaten again, but forced them back. "I am sorry. For all of it, for what has been done to your people, for the part my people played in it, whether Spanish or Mexican. We have all taken from you. Your sorrow changes nothing. But at least you see it. Most white people look at us and see only savages or drunks or obstacles. They do not see human beings with families and dreams and grief. They do not want to see, because seeing would require acknowledging what was taken. And that acknowledgement would demand restitution they are unwilling to give." He stood abruptly, moving to check the horse again. "Rest is over. We need to move. The heat is still bad, but waiting longer gives them more time to find us." Mariana forced herself to stand, biting back a groan as her abused muscles protested. Todachin helped her mount, his touch impersonal but not unkind, and then swung up in front of her. The horse moved forward reluctantly, clearly still tired, but obedient to its rider's commands. They left the shade and emerged back into the full hammer of the sun. The afternoon stretched into a hellish blur of heat and pain and endless movement. The landscape became increasingly surreal, rock formations twisting into impossible shapes, colors shifting from red to orange to purple as minerals in the stone caught the light. Several times they passed ancient ruins, stone walls half-collapsed, pottery shards scattered across the ground like broken memories. Todachin explained that these were the homes of the ancient ones, people who had lived here long before even the Dine arrived, people who had built great cities and then vanished, leaving only questions behind. They stopped once more to rest and water the horse at a hidden seep Todachin knew. A place where water trickled from between rocks and collected in a natural basin. The water was warm and tasted of minerals, but it was wet, and that was all that mattered. While the horse drank, Todachin climbed a nearby rise to survey their back trail. When he returned, his face was grim. "They are closer than I thought. Perhaps 2 hours behind us, maybe less. They have fresh horses, I think. They must have sent someone back to the ranch for remounts while they continued tracking. That gives them an advantage I did not account for." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Mariana's brief moment of relief evaporated, replaced by cold fear. "Can we outrun them?" "Not directly, but I know a place. Difficult to reach, easy to defend. If we can get there before they spot us, we might have a chance." He studied her face, seeing the exhaustion there, the toll the journey was taking. "It will be hard, harder than anything we have done so far. The path is steep and narrow. One wrong step and we fall. But it is the only option I see. Then we take it. I did not come this far to surrender now." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "You are stronger than you look." "That is good. You will need every bit of that strength for what comes next." They rode hard, pushing the protesting horse faster than was wise, but desperation drove them now. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Shadows lengthened, providing some relief from the direct heat, but also making the terrain more treacherous, hiding obstacles in pools of darkness. Todachin navigated with the confidence of someone who knew every stone and shadow, but even he had to slow occasionally to find the correct path. Then rising before them like a fortress wall appeared a massive cliff face of striated red and white stone. It towered hundreds of feet into the air, its face nearly vertical, seemingly impassable. But Todachin turned the horse toward a narrow cleft in the rock, barely visible unless you knew where to look. As they approached, Mariana could see that the cleft was actually the beginning of a steep trail that switchbacked up the cliff face, so narrow in places that it seemed impossible a horse could pass. "This is the path," Todachin said, dismounting. "We lead the horse from here, one person in front, one behind. I will go first. You follow. Stay close to the cliff wall, not the edge. Do not look down. Just watch where you place your feet and keep moving." Mariana dismounted and looked up at the trail, disappearing into shadow above them. Her legs trembled, her heart raced. Heights had never been a friend to her, and this trail looked like something from a nightmare. "How high does it go?" High enough. At the top is a mesa with only one way up. If we reach it before they see us, we can defend it. They will not be able to follow on horseback, and on foot they will be exposed on the trail. We will have the advantage of high ground." He saw her fear, and his voice softened slightly. "You can do this. You have already done impossible things today. This is just one more." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and took her position behind the horse. Todachin began the ascent, leading the animal with calm confidence, speaking to it in his own language, a soothing stream of words that seemed to give the horse courage. Mariana followed, her hands pressed against the rough stone wall, her eyes fixed on the ground directly in front of her feet. The trail was worse than she had imagined. In places it was barely 2 feet wide, with a sheer drop on one side that fell away into nothing. Loose stones scattered under her feet, tumbling over the edge and falling for what seemed like forever before striking bottom with sounds too faint to hear. The horse's hooves scraped and slid on the rock, sending more debris cascading down. Each time it happened, Mariana's heart stopped, certain the animal would panic and plunge over the edge, taking Todachin with it. But the horse trusted its handler, and Todachin moved with infinite patience, never rushing, always testing each step before committing his weight. They climbed in silence, broken only by the rasp of breath and the scrape of hoof on stone. Minutes stretched into eternities. Mariana's legs burned with effort, her lungs labored in the thin air, her head swam with exhaustion and fear. But she kept moving, kept climbing, because stopping meant dying, and she had not survived this long to die on a cliff face. Halfway up, disaster nearly struck. A section of the trail had collapsed, leaving a gap, perhaps 4 feet wide. Todachin examined it carefully, then led the horse across in a quick lunge, the animal's hooves scrambling for purchase on the far side. He made it look almost easy. Then it was Mariana's turn. She stood at the edge, looking at the gap, at the empty air beyond it, at the terrible drop below. Her body refused to move, frozen by primal terror. "Mariana," Todachin's voice cut through her panic. "Look at me, not down. At me." She raised her eyes to his face, saw the calm certainty there. "You can do this. It is only a step, a large step, but only a step. I will catch you if you stumble. Trust me." Trust, such a simple word for such an impossible demand. But what choice did she have? She took a breath, said a prayer to gods she was not sure she believed in, and jumped. For one terrible instant, she was suspended over nothing, her body in freefall, death reaching up to claim her. Then Todachin's hand closed around her wrist like an iron band, pulling her forward, and she crashed into him. Both of them falling back against the cliff wall, but safe. Alive on solid ground. "Good," he said simply, releasing her. "The rest is easier. Come." They continued upward as the sun touched the horizon, turning the world to fire. The trail seemed endless, a punishment designed by malicious gods, but finally, impossibly, it ended. They emerged onto the flat top of the mesa, a roughly circular space perhaps 200 feet across, covered in sparse grass and scattered boulders. The views in all directions were staggering, the desert spreading away to distant horizons, but Mariana had no energy left to appreciate beauty. She collapsed onto the ground and lay there gasping like a landed fish. Todachin led the horse to the center of the mesa, where a depression in the rock held water from recent rains. The animal drank deeply while he stood watching the trail they had just climbed, waiting to see if their pursuers would appear. The light was fading fast now, the brief desert twilight giving way to night. Stars began to appear, first a few, then hundreds, then thousands, until the sky was a river of light flowing overhead. "They did not follow," Mariana managed to say between breaths. "We made it. We made it up. That does not mean we are safe. They will camp below tonight, wait for morning light. Then they will come, and when they do, we will have to fight." He turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the growing darkness. "Can you fight? Have you ever held a weapon?" "I can learn. I can do whatever is necessary." "Then rest tonight. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow we face whatever comes, and we face it together because there is no other choice now. We are bound to each other by circumstance and necessity. Your fate is my fate, at least until this ends." He began unpacking supplies from his saddlebags, producing dried meat, a thin blanket, a water skin. Simple provisions for what would likely be their last night of peace. Mariana watched him work, this man who had saved her life multiple times today, this stranger who had risked everything for reasons even he did not fully understand. She wanted to thank him again, but knew the words would be inadequate. Some debts could not be repaid with speech. As full darkness fell, they sat together on the mesa top, two souls bound by desperation in a land that promised only hardship. Below them, the desert was an ocean of shadow. Behind them, enemies gathered. Ahead, the boundary that represented freedom or death, salvation or damnation. And between them, slowly, grudgingly, something that might one day become trust was beginning to grow. Dawn came slowly to the mesa top, the darkness retreating reluctantly before the advancing light. Mariana woke stiff and cold, her body a catalogue of new pains layered over yesterday's injuries. She had slept fitfully, wrapped in the thin blanket Todachin had given her, waking repeatedly to find him sitting upright against a boulder, his rifle across his knees, watching the trail below. He had not slept at all, she realized. He had kept vigil through the entire night, a silent guardian between her and the darkness. The morning air was sharp and clear, carrying the scent of sage and something else, something that made Todachin's head lift suddenly. Smoke, very faint but unmistakable. Their pursuers had made camp below and were cooking breakfast, confident enough in their numbers to risk a fire. Todachin stood and moved to the edge of the mesa, studying the land below with narrowed eyes. "They are gathering," he said quietly. "I count 5 men. Thornton's son is among them, and 2 others I recognize from the ranch. The other 2 are strangers. Hired guns, most likely. Men who kill for money and ask no questions." He turned back to her, his face grave. "They will come soon. Once the sun is fully up and they can see the trail clearly, they will begin the climb. We have perhaps 1 hour to prepare." Mariana rose, her stomach tight with fear, but her mind surprisingly clear. She had passed beyond normal terror into a strange calm, the acceptance that comes when all choices have narrowed to a single point. "What do you need me to do?" Todachin studied her for a moment, then nodded, as if reaching a decision. "Gather stones, fist-sized and larger. Pile them here near the trail entrance. When they climb, we will make them regret it." He moved to his horse and pulled a second rifle from his saddle, checking its action and load. "Have you fired a gun before?" "Once. My father taught me when I was young before he died. But that was many years ago." "Then you remember the basics. That will have to be enough." He handed her the weapon, its weight heavier than she expected. "This is a Winchester repeater. 15 rounds. You pull this lever to chamber a new cartridge after each shot. The trigger pull is heavy but smooth. Aim for the body, not the head. A body is a larger target and just as effective at stopping a man." He demonstrated the action, his hands moving with the fluid confidence of long practice. "If they reach the top, if I fall, you keep shooting until the rifle is empty. Then you use the knife I will give you. Then you use your hands, your teeth, whatever you have. You do not surrender. Men like these do not take prisoners kindly, especially women. You understand?" Mariana nodded, her throat too tight for speech. The rifle felt like a live thing in her hands, heavy with the promise of violence. She had never imagined herself capable of killing another human being, had been raised to believe such actions were the province of evil people. But the world had taught her that evil wore many faces, and sometimes survival required becoming what you had never wanted to be. She spent the next half hour gathering stones, while Todachin prepared their defensive position. He arranged boulders to provide cover, marked ranges with small piles of stones, checked and rechecked his ammunition. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, the preparations of a man who had done this before. She wondered how many times he had stood on the edge of violence, how many battles he had fought that she would never know about. The pile of throwing stones grew steadily. Some were smooth and round, water-worn from ancient floods. Others were sharp and angular, freshly broken from the cliff face. All were heavy enough to do damage to a man climbing a narrow trail. It was primitive warfare, the kind humans had waged since the first 2 tribes had met and decided the other must die. But primitive did not mean ineffective. When the sun cleared the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and shadow, they saw movement below. The men were gathering at the base of the trail, looking up at the cliff face, arguing among themselves. Even from this distance, Mariana could read the body language of conflict. Some wanted to proceed immediately. Others were more cautious, understanding the danger of climbing an exposed trail toward enemies holding high ground. James Thornton settled the argument by starting up the trail himself, his pride and arrogance overriding tactical sense. 2 of the hired guns followed him, spreading out to make multiple targets. The other 2 remained below, rifles ready to provide covering fire if needed. It was sound strategy, Mariana realized with sinking heart. Todeschini could not watch all angles at once. If he focused on the climbers, the men below might get off lucky shots. If he engaged the men below, the climbers would advance unopposed. "They are not fools," Todeschini muttered, confirming her thoughts. "They have fought before, understand tactics. This will be harder than I hoped." He glanced at her. "You take the stones. I will use the rifle. When I tell you to throw, you throw at the climbers. Do not hesitate. Do not aim carefully. Just throw hard and fast. Volume matters more than accuracy. Make them afraid. Make them hesitate. Make them doubt. Fear is a weapon as much as any bullet." The climbers were perhaps a third of the way up when Todeschini fired his first shot. The crack of the rifle split the morning air, echoing off the cliff face. One of the hired guns jerked and fell, tumbling backward off the trail, his scream cutting off abruptly when he hit the rocks below. The sound of impact carried clearly in the still air, a wet crunch that made Mariana's stomach turn. Return fire came immediately from the men below, bullets whining off the rocks around their position. Todeschini had chosen their cover well. The angle was poor for the shooters below, most of their rounds striking stone well above their heads. But it forced him to keep low, limiting his ability to target the remaining climbers who used the cover fire to advance rapidly up the trail. "Now!" Todeschini barked. "The stones! Throw!" Mariana grabbed the first rock and hurled it with all her strength. It arced through the air and struck the cliff face above the climbers, bouncing and tumbling downward, gathering speed. James Thornton saw it coming and pressed himself against the wall, but his companion was not as quick. The stone caught him on the shoulder, with enough force to spin him around. For a terrible moment, he teetered on the edge of the trail, arms windmilling. Then he found his balance and pressed forward. She threw another stone, then another, establishing a rhythm. Some missed entirely, others struck near the climbers, forcing them to duck and cover. A few found their marks, hitting with satisfying thuds. It was exhausting work, each throw requiring her to expose herself to potential fire from below, but fear drove her arms. Fear and something darker, a savage satisfaction in fighting back against the men who wanted her dead. Todeschini was firing steadily now, methodical shots aimed at the men below who were trying to advance up the trail to support their companions. Another man fell, clutching his leg, dragging himself back to cover. But James and the remaining hired gun were getting closer, now less than 50 feet from the top. Close enough that Mariana could see James's face, twisted with rage and determination. Close enough to hear him shouting encouragement to his companion. "The rifle!" Todeschini said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Use it now." "They are too close for stones." Mariana dropped her rocks and grabbed the Winchester, her hands shaking as she brought it to her shoulder. The climbers were clear targets now, exposed on the trail with nowhere to hide. All she had to do was point and squeeze the trigger. Simple. Except nothing about taking a human life was simple. "Shoot," Todeschini commanded, not looking at her, focused on the men below. "If you do not shoot, they will kill us both. Choose." She aimed at the hired gun, the stranger whose name she did not know, whose family she would never meet. She saw him as a collection of parts, body, arms, legs, head. She tried not to see him as human, as someone's son or brother or father. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared and bucked against her shoulder, the recoil surprising in its violence. Her shot went wide, striking rock beside the man's head, showering him with stone fragments, but it was enough to make him flinch, to break his concentration. His foot slipped on loose gravel. He made a desperate grab for the cliff wall, but his fingers found no purchase. For an eternal instant he hung suspended, defying gravity through will alone. Then he fell, silently at first, then with a rising scream that cut off with terrible finality. James Thornton howled with rage, a primal sound that spoke of fury beyond reason. He charged forward, climbing with reckless speed, his rifle held in one hand while he used the other to pull himself upward. Bullets from below kept Todachin pinned, preventing him from taking careful aim. Mariana worked the lever on the Winchester and fired again. Then again, her shots wild but forcing James to slow, to seek what cover the trail offered. "He is going to make it," Todachin said, his voice tight. He fired twice more at the men below, then turned his full attention to James. When he reaches the top, he will come with fury. Be ready. James Thornton pulled himself over the edge of the mesa with a roar of triumph, his face flushed, his eyes wild. He had lost his rifle on the climb, but his pistol was in his hand, and murder was written clearly in his expression. Todachin's next shot took him in the chest, spinning him sideways, but James was running on rage and adrenaline now, beyond pain. He fired back, his bullet striking the boulder beside Todachin's head, stone splinters cutting a line across the Navajo's cheek. Mariana fired the Winchester, the bullet catching James in the shoulder. He staggered but kept coming, kept firing. Another shot from Todachin hit him in the stomach, doubling him over, but still he advanced, crawling now, his pistol wavering but searching for a target. It was horrifying, watching a man refuse to die, watching determination overcome catastrophic injury. She understood then what Todachin had meant about men like these. They did not quit. They had to be stopped absolutely. Todachin stood from cover and fired his final shot at point-blank range. James Thornton fell forward and was still. The sudden silence was overwhelming, broken only by the ringing in Mariana's ears and the ragged sound of her own breathing. Below, the remaining two men had stopped firing, perhaps reassessing their odds, perhaps simply shocked by the carnage. "Reload," Todachin said, his voice steady despite the blood running down his face. "This is not over. Two remain below, and they have seen their employer's son die. They will either flee or attack with everything they have. We must be ready for both." Mariana fumbled with the rifle, her hands slick with sweat, trying to remember how to reload. Todachin moved to the edge and looked down, studying the men below. What he saw made his expression darken. They are not retreating. They are preparing to climb together, providing cover for each other. These are professionals who understand that retreat now means death later. Thornton will hunt them for failing to kill us. Their only chance is to succeed. Can we hold against both of them? We must. There is no other option. He checked his ammunition, his movements quick and precise. "I have perhaps 20 rounds left. You have 11 in that rifle if you loaded it properly. Between us, we have enough to make them regret their choice. But they know this too. They will be careful, use cover, advance only when they have clear shots at us. It will be a siege, and sieges favor patience. The question is whether they have more patience than we have ammunition." The two men began their climb in coordinated fashion, moving in leapfrog pattern. One would advance while the other provided covering fire, then they would switch. It was professional, disciplined, the kind of teamwork that came from experience. These were not ranch hands playing at being soldiers. These were men who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation or remorse. Todachin and Mariana fell into their own rhythm, taking turns shooting and reloading, forcing the climbers to move slowly, to think carefully about each advance. Time became fluid, measured in trigger pulls and the crack of rifles rather than minutes. The sun climbed higher, turning the mesa into a furnace. Sweat stung Mariana's eyes, made her hands slippery on the rifle stock. Her shoulder ached from the repeated recoil. Her ears rang continuously, but she kept firing, kept working the lever, kept forcing bullets down range. One of the climbers made a mistake, exposed himself a fraction too long while moving between cover. Todachin's shot caught him in the throat and he fell backward, his rifle clattering away down the trail. The final man, realizing he was alone, froze in place behind a slight bulge in the cliff face. For long minutes nothing moved, nothing sounded, except the wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "You can go back," Todachin called down in English. "We have no desire to kill you. This is not your fight. You were hired to do a job, and the man who hired you is dead. Your obligation ended with his last breath. Go back down. Ride away. Live to fight another day." Silence. Then a voice floated up, rough and tired. "Can't do that. Got a reputation to maintain. I fail this job, word gets around, I never work again. Rather die here than starve slowly somewhere else." "Then you will die here," Todachin replied, "and your reputation will die with you, because dead men have no reputations. Only corpses have certainty." More silence. Mariana could almost feel the man below weighing his options, calculating odds, trying to find a path that led to survival. She understood his dilemma. In a world where your word and your reputation were the only currencies that mattered, failure was not just defeat. It was erasure. But surely life mattered more than pride. "I'm coming up," the man finally called, "but not to fight, to talk. I want to see this through, understand what I'm dying for. You give me that much, I will accept whatever comes." Todachin glanced at Mariana, then back to the trail. "Come slowly, hands visible, weapons slung across your back. Any sudden move and you die." The man appeared at the edge of the mesa, hands raised, rifle hanging by its strap. He was older than Mariana expected, perhaps 50, his face weathered and scarred, his eyes holding the weary knowledge of too many fights. He looked at the body of James Thornton, at the defensive position Todachin had constructed, at Mariana standing with the Winchester ready. Then he looked at Todachin, and something passed between them, some recognition that only warriors could share. "You are Diné," the man said. Not a question. "I fought against your people in the 70s, chased you through these same canyons, killed some of you. You probably killed some of us. Now here we are again, on opposite sides of a fight neither of us chose." He lowered his hands slowly. "The woman, what did she do?" "Witnessed a murder, ran for her life. Powerful men want her silenced." Todachin's rifle never wavered. "That is all there is. No great crime, no grand conspiracy, just another woman being crushed by the wheels of power." The hired gun nodded slowly. "That is how the world works, isn't it? The strong take what they want, the weak die. Been that way since Cain killed Abel, will be that way until the last man standing kills the second to last. I have made my peace with it. But I am tired, friend, tired of killing, tired of running, tired of choosing between starvation and sin." He looked directly at Mariana. Do you have family? People who will mourn you if you die?" Mariana thought of her mother, long dead. Her father, buried in Tucson. Her brother, lost to his own demons years ago. "No," she said quietly. "No one who will mourn. I am alone in the world." "Then we have that in common. No one will mourn me either. No wife, no children, no friends who are not themselves dead or disappeared. Just ghosts and regrets." He turned back to Todachin. "I will make you an offer. I walk back down that trail. I tell Thornton the woman died up here, fell during the fight. I collect half my fee for trying, then I ride out of this territory and never return. The woman disappears into Navajo land, becomes someone new, and everyone forgets she existed. Thornton gets his pride salved. I get paid. You get to keep breathing, and she gets her freedom. Everyone wins something." "Except the truth," Todachin said. "The truth." The man laughed, a bitter sound. "The truth is, whatever powerful men say it is. You know that as well as I do. Your people know it better than most. How many treaties were signed in truth and broken in lies? How many promises made and forgotten? Truth is a luxury for people with power. The rest of us traffic in survival." Todachin was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes studying the man before him. Finally, he said, You swear this? You swear you will tell Thornton she is dead and then leave this territory?" "I swear on the graves of my parents and the memory of better men than I became. I am many things, but I keep my word once given." "Then go. Take your oath with you, but know that if you break it, if you come hunting again, I will find you. And next time there will be no conversation, no mercy, no second chance, just blood and silence." And the man nodded once, then turned and began the descent. They watched him climb down, his movements careful and slow. At the bottom, he mounted his horse and looked up one final time. He raised a hand in something that might have been a salute or a farewell, then rode north toward the Thornton Ranch, growing smaller until he was just a speck on the vast desert landscape. Then nothing at all. Mariana let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her entire body began to shake, delayed shock and exhaustion hitting all at once. The rifle slipped from her hands and she sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had killed a man, maybe more than one. The stones she had thrown, the shots she had fired, all of it had been in service of death. She had become something she never wanted to be. Todachin knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, heavy and warm and real. "You did what was necessary. You chose life over death, yours and mine. There is no shame in that. The shame belongs to the men who forced this choice upon you." I can still see his face, the man who fell. I can still hear him scream. "Good. Remember it. Let it teach you that life is precious and violence is terrible. But do not let it break you. You are stronger than you know. Today proved that." He stood and offered his hand. "Come. We are close to the boundary now. Just a few more miles. By nightfall, you will be in Navajo land, and Clayton Thornton's reach will end. You will be free." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Free! The word sounded foreign, impossible. But ahead, beyond the mesa, beyond the desert, beyond the blood and fear and pain, freedom waited, and she would walk toward it, one step at a time, until she either found it or died trying. They descended the mesa in the afternoon light, moving carefully down the treacherous trail that had nearly killed them on the way up. The bodies of the fallen men remained where they had landed, broken shapes against the red earth that would soon be cleaned by scavengers. Mariana tried not to look at them, but her eyes were drawn despite her will, memorizing faces that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Todachin showed no such hesitation, his gaze passing over the dead with the detachment of someone who had seen too much death to be moved by it anymore. The horse was tired, its strength depleted by the long day and the weight it had carried. They walked rather than rode, leading the animal gently, speaking to it in soft voices. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for a day that had held so much violence. Beauty and brutality existing side by side, Mariana thought. That seemed to be the way of this land, perhaps the way of all lands, if you looked closely enough. "How much further?" she asked, her voice hoarse from smoke and shouting and fear. 2 hours of walking. Maybe 3 at this pace. There's a place I know, a spring where my people sometimes camp when moving sheep between pastures. We can rest there, clean ourselves, let the horse drink. Then, if you wish, I can take you to my family's hogan. My mother will feed you, give you clean clothes, a place to sleep where no one will find you." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Or I can point you toward the nearest trading post where you can disappear among strangers. The choice is yours. You have earned the right to choose." Mariana was quiet for a long time, thinking about families and strangers, about the difference between hiding and belonging. Finally, she said, "Tell me about your mother, about your family. What kind of people are they?" A small smile touched Todachin's lips, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines carved by sun and hardship. My mother is small but fierce. She survived the long walk to Bosque Redondo when she was just a girl. She watched her parents die there, her older brother, her baby sister. When they finally let us return, she was one of the few from her family who made it back. She married my father and built a life from nothing. After he died, she could have given up, but she did not. She raised me and my younger sister alone, taught us to be strong, to remember who we are even when the world tells us we are nothing. Oh, your sister, the one who was taken. Does your mother speak of her? Every day, she keeps a blanket my sister was weaving when she was taken. It sits unfinished in the corner of the hogan waiting. My mother says it will stay unfinished until my sister returns to complete it. I think she knows my sister is likely dead, but hope is sometimes stronger than knowledge. Hope can keep you alive when nothing else will. They walked in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The desert around them was coming alive as the heat of the day began to fade. Lizards emerged from hidden places, small birds called from the scattered vegetation, insects hummed in the still air. Life persisting despite the harshness, despite the death that visited regularly. It was a lesson, Mariana thought. If this land could sustain life, perhaps she could too. The spring appeared as Todachin had promised, a small pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees that had somehow found purchase in the rocky soil. The sound of water trickling from between stones was like music after the dry silence of the desert. The horse quickened its pace, smelling moisture, and plunged its muzzle into the pool, drinking deeply. Todachin let it drink its fill before pulling it back to prevent sickness from too much water too fast. "We rest here until dark," he said, unsaddling the horse and setting the gear in the shade. "Then we move again. I want to reach my mother's hogan while there is still moonlight to see by. She will be awake. She sleeps little since my father died. Too many ghosts visit her in the darkness." Mariana knelt by the pool and splashed, water on her face, washing away the dust and blood and smoke. The water was cold and clean and perfect. She drank handfuls of it, feeling it revive her body, if not her spirit. When she looked at her reflection in the still surface, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was burned and scratched, her hair wild and tangled, her eyes holding a hardness that had not been there 2 days ago. She had become someone new, forged by necessity into something stronger, but also something damaged. She wondered if she would ever again be the woman she had been before. Todachin built a small fire, more for light than warmth, and they ate the last of his dried meat in silence. The stars emerged, first a few, then countless thousands, a river of light flowing across the black sky. Mariana had never seen so many stars in the city, where lanterns and buildings obscured the heavens. Out here, the universe revealed itself, in all its terrible beauty, making her feel simultaneously insignificant and part of something vast and eternal. "What will you do?" Todachin asked suddenly. "After tonight, after you are safe on Navajo land, what kind of life will you build?" It was a question she had not let herself consider, too focused on survival to think about what came after. Now, forced to confront it, she found she had no clear answer. "I do not know. I have no skills beyond cooking and cleaning. I speak Spanish and English, but no Navajo. I am neither white nor fully Indian, neither Mexican nor American. I belong nowhere, which means perhaps I can belong anywhere, or nowhere at all. You have skills beyond cooking and cleaning. You have courage. You have the strength to keep moving when most would have given up. You have the ability to make hard choices when necessary. These are valuable skills in any world." He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "My people have a tradition. When someone saves your life, they become responsible for it. Not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of obligation. I pulled you from death today. That creates a bond, whether either of us wished for it or not. I do not want to be anyone's obligation, Mariana said quietly. I have been property before. I will not be property again, even well-meaning property. You misunderstand. It is not you who becomes the obligation. It is I who becomes obligated to you. I must help you build a life, must ensure the life I saved was worth saving. Otherwise, what was the point? I simply delayed your death rather than preventing it. He looked at her directly, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. Stay with my family. Learn our ways. Let my mother teach you Navajo. Help with the sheep, with the weaving, with the work that needs doing. Earn your place not through blood, but through contribution. In time, if you wish to leave, you can, but at least you will leave with skills and knowledge and a foundation to build upon. Mariana felt tears prick her eyes for the second time that day. Kindness, she had learned, was more devastating than cruelty, because cruelty expected nothing in return, while kindness demanded belief in human goodness, a belief she had thought beaten out of her long ago. Why would your mother accept me? I'm a stranger who brings danger to her door because I will ask her to, and because she understands what it means to be hunted, to be powerless, to need sanctuary. She will see in you what she once was. And perhaps in helping you, she will heal some small part of herself that has been broken since my sister was taken. He stood, kicking dirt over the fire until only embers remained. Come, the moon is rising. We have miles to walk before we can rest. They traveled through the night, following paths only Todachin could see, moving through a landscape of shadow and silver light. The desert at night was a different world, cooler and quieter, filled with sounds that had no names. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices rising and falling in complex harmonies. Somewhere an owl hooted, hunting small creatures that ventured from their burrows. The horses' hooves made soft sounds on the sandy ground, a steady rhythm that measured their progress toward whatever future awaited. After what felt like hours, Todachin stopped and pointed ahead. In the distance, barely visible in the moonlight, stood a rounded structure built of logs and earth, its door facing east as tradition demanded. Smoke rose from the hole in its center, a thin line reaching toward the stars. Light glowed from the doorway, warm and welcoming in the vast darkness. A hogan, a home. My mother is awake as I said she would be. She will have felt my approach, known I was coming even before she saw me. Mothers have knowledge that transcends distance. He turned to Mariana. When we enter, let me speak first. I will explain what has happened, why I brought you. She will decide whether you can stay. Do not be offended if she is not immediately warm. She has learned to be cautious with strangers, for good reason. They approached slowly, Todachin calling out softly in Navajo to announce their presence. A figure appeared in the doorway, small and bent, wrapped in a blanket against the night chill. Even from a distance, Mariana could feel the force of the woman's presence, a strength that had nothing to do with physical size. This was someone who had survived the unsurvivable, who had outlasted enemies and hardships that would have broken most people. This was someone who knew the weight of grief and had chosen to keep living anyway. Todachin spoke rapidly in his language, his hands moving in gestures that emphasized his words. The old woman listened without interrupting, her eyes moving between her son and the stranger he had brought. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, studying Mariana with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held the gaze, knowing that to flinch would be to fail some test she did not fully understand. Then the old woman spoke, her voice cracked with age but strong. Todachin translated, "My mother says you have the eyes of someone who has walked through fire. She asks if you are willing to work, to learn, to become part of something rather than remaining apart from everything." "Tell her yes," Mariana said, her voice steady. "Tell her I will work until my hands bleed, if that is what is required. Tell her I have nothing to offer but my labor and my gratitude, and I offer both freely," Todachin translated. His mother's face softened slightly, the harsh lines easing. She spoke again, longer this time. "She says you may stay, but there are conditions. You must learn our language. You must respect our ways. You must understand that you are a guest who may one day become family, but that transformation requires time and trust. She says her son has good judgment in most things, and if he believes you are worth saving, she will trust his judgment until you prove otherwise. She says to come inside, eat, rest. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Mariana felt something in her chest release, a tension she had been holding so long she had forgotten it was there. She stepped forward and, on impulse, took the old woman's weathered hands in her own. "Thank you," she said simply in English, knowing the words would not be understood, but hoping the emotion would transcend language. The old woman squeezed her hands once, firmly, then turned and led them into the hogan. The interior was dim, lit by a small fire in the center, smoke rising through the opening above. The walls were hung with woven blankets in complex geometric patterns, their colors muted in the firelight. In one corner sat a loom with an unfinished blanket stretched across it. The work stopped mid-row, waiting for hands that would never return to complete it. Mariana understood without being told that this was the sister's blanket, the shrine to hope that Todachin had mentioned. They sat around the fire, and the old woman served them food. Simple but nourishing: mutton stew, fry bread, corn. Mariana ate slowly, savoring each bite, tasting not just food but safety, sanctuary, the possibility of peace. As she ate, she watched Todachin and his mother talking quietly in their language, their heads bent close, their gestures speaking of deep affection, despite the hardship life had dealt them. This was family, she realized, not the family defined by blood or law, but the family built by choice and circumstance and the daily decision to care for one another despite the cost. After the meal, the old woman showed Mariana a corner where she could sleep, spreading a blanket for her, patting it once in a gesture that transcended language. Mariana lay down, her body finally releasing the tension of the past 2 days. She expected to lie awake, haunted by the faces of the men who had died, by the violence she had witnessed and participated in. But exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, pulling her down into darkness. She woke to sunlight streaming through the doorway and the smell of coffee brewing over a rebuilt fire. The old woman was already awake, moving around the hogan with the efficiency of someone who had performed these tasks 10,000 times. Todachin was gone, his sleeping place empty. Mariana sat up, momentarily disoriented, unsure for a heartbeat where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory returned, and with it the understanding that she had survived. Against all odds, despite all obstacles, she had made it. The old woman noticed her stirring and said something in Navajo, gesturing toward the fire, toward the coffee. Mariana did not understand the words, but understood the intention. She rose and accepted the tin cup of coffee, wrapping her hands around its warmth, letting the bitter liquid wake her fully. Through the doorway, she could see the desert stretching away in all directions, beautiful and harsh in the morning light. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, Clayton Thornton was receiving news of his son's death. Somewhere out there, the hired gun was spinning a story about how she had fallen during the fight, her body lost in the canyons. Somewhere out there, her old life was being buried and forgotten. Todachin appeared in the doorway, carrying fresh water from a nearby spring. He smiled when he saw her awake, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Good morning. You slept like the dead, which is fitting since you have died to your old life and been reborn to a new one. My mother has work planned for you today. She's not one to let anyone sit idle, even guests who arrived half dead the night before. Are you ready to begin?" Mariana looked at the old woman, at Todachin, at the simple interior of the hogan that somehow felt more like home than any grand house she had ever worked in. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the impossible choices and desperate gambles that had shaped the past 2 days. She thought about the woman she had been, the servant who kept her eyes down and her voice quiet, who believed her only value lay in being useful to powerful people. That woman was gone, burned away by sun and fear and the discovery that she could be strong when strength was required. "Yes," she said simply. "I am ready." The old woman nodded in satisfaction and began speaking, her hands moving in gestures that Mariana did not yet understand, but knew she would learn. Todachin translated, his voice patient. She says today you learn to card wool. Tomorrow you learn to spin. The day after, you begin to understand the loom. Each skill builds on the last. Each day you become more capable. This is how we survive. Not by grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but by the quiet accumulation of knowledge and the steady application of effort. She says you have already proven you can endure. Now you must prove you can live. Mariana set down her coffee and moved to where the old woman stood beside a basket of raw wool. She listened as Todachin translated instructions, watched as gnarled hands demonstrated techniques honed over decades. She began the work clumsily at first, her city-soft hands struggling with the unfamiliar motions. But she persisted, and gradually the wool began to straighten and align under her touch, transforming from chaos into order. As she worked, Mariana thought about transformation, about how a person could be one thing in the morning and something entirely different by nightfall. About how survival sometimes required becoming someone new, shedding old skins like a snake, outgrowing its constraints. She had fled the Thornton Ranch as a frightened servant. She had crossed the desert as a desperate fugitive. She had fought on the mesa as a woman, defending her right to exist. And now, here in this hogan, working wool between her fingers while an old Navajo woman watched with patient eyes, she was becoming something else entirely. The days blurred into weeks, then months. Mariana learned the language slowly, stumbling over unfamiliar sounds. But Todachin's mother was a patient teacher, correcting without shaming, encouraging without coddling. She learned to spin wool into yarn, to prepare dyes from plants gathered in the desert, to sit at the loom and add rows to the complex patterns that emerged thread by thread. Her hands grew calloused and strong. Her body adapted to the rhythms of this new life, rising with the sun, working through the day, sleeping when darkness fell. Todachin visited often, bringing news from the outside world that filtered slowly into Navajo territory. Clayton Thornton had indeed been told that Mariana died in the desert. Her body never recovered. He had raged and threatened, and eventually moved on to other concerns, distracted by the territorial inspectors who were examining his land claims with uncomfortable scrutiny. The marshal had closed the case, accepting the story of the theft and the fugitive's death. The Martinez family in Tucson had been satisfied that justice, however rough, had been served. Mariana Ochoa had been erased from official records, had become a ghost, which meant she was finally free to become someone real. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and crimson, Mariana sat outside the hogan with Todachin's mother, working on a blanket together. The old woman's English had not improved, and Mariana's Navajo was still rough, but they had developed a communication that transcended language, built on shared work and mutual respect. The old woman suddenly spoke, her words slow and deliberate. And though Mariana did not understand every word, she understood the meaning. The blanket stretched between them was no longer the unfinished work of a lost daughter, but a new creation that two women were building together. The old woman was teaching Mariana the patterns that had been taught to her, passing down knowledge that had survived centuries of upheaval and loss. In teaching, she was honoring her lost daughter. In learning, Mariana was ensuring that the knowledge would survive another generation. It was not the completion anyone had expected, but it was completion nonetheless. Todachin appeared from where he had been tending the sheep, his silhouette dark against the fading light. He watched the two women working together and smiled. "My mother says you have become skilled. She says your weaving shows patience and attention to detail. She says these are the marks of someone who will create beauty in the world rather than simply consuming it." Mariana looked up from her work, her hands stilling on the loom. "Tell her I had a good teacher. Tell her I'm grateful for the chance to learn, to become something more than I was." "She knows." "She says you remind her of her daughter, not in appearance or manner, but in spirit. She says you have the same determination to survive, the same refusal to be diminished by hardship. She says that perhaps you were meant to find your way here, that perhaps there are no accidents in the universe, only patterns we are too small to see completely. Mariana felt tears sting her eyes, but she smiled through them. She had fled into the desert expecting death, and had instead found life. Not the life she had planned or imagined, but a life nonetheless. A life with purpose and meaning and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. A life where she belonged not because of blood or birth, but because she had chosen to stay and others had chosen to accept her. As night fell and stars emerged in their countless thousands, the three of them sat together outside the hogan, sharing the silence that people who trust each other can share. The desert stretched away in all directions, vast and indifferent, beautiful and terrible. But here, in this small circle of firelight, Mariana had found something the desert could not take away. She had found a place to stand, a reason to wake each morning, a community that valued her for who she was becoming rather than who she had been. She thought of the desperate woman who had knelt in the dust before a Navajo scout and begged for help. That woman had believed she would not survive leaving the ranch. She had been right. That woman had not survived. But a different woman, stronger and wiser and more complete, had emerged from the desert. And this new woman was learning day by day what it meant to truly live rather than merely survive. The fire crackled and sparked, sending embers drifting upward toward the stars. In the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The desert sang its ancient song, indifferent to human drama, eternal and unchanging. But within that vast indifference, small pockets of warmth and light persisted. Small communities of people who chose compassion over cruelty, who chose to help rather than harm, who chose to see the humanity in strangers and offer them sanctuary. Mariana looked at Totachin, at his mother, at the blanket taking shape on the loom, and she understood that this was her answer to the violence and injustice of the world. Not grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but this, quiet work, patient teaching, the daily choice to create rather than destroy. She had crossed the desert seeking escape. What she had found was purpose. And in finding purpose, she had finally, impossibly found home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.